Hello there, friends. Before we start this quiet journey together, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? I always find it fascinating, imagining people from distant places connected by one simple story. Maybe you're somewhere warm, with the sound of crickets outside your window. Or perhaps it's winter, and the snow is pressing softly against the glass. Either way, tonight, I'll take you far away, to the ancient heart of the world, where merchants and wanderers once crossed mountains, deserts, and empires. This is the story of the Silk Road, and of one man who followed it from sunrise to sunset. I was not always an old traveler with silver hair and quiet eyes. Once I was young, restless, curious, and foolish enough to believe that the world could fit into a single lifetime. I was born in the city of Chang'an, which you may know today as Xi'an, the eastern gate of the Silk Road. Even then, it was already ancient, filled with the rumble of wooden wheels and the murmur of thousands of voices. Every dawn, the markets came alive with color and sound. Bolts of silk that shimmered like captured sunlight, jars of tea leaves packed with care, porcelain so thin it rang like a bell when touched. I remember walking through the alleys as a boy, the smell of roasted chestnuts and incense twisting in the cold morning air. I would watch foreign traders in long robes, their beards dusted with the red sand of distant lands. They spoke in strange, musical accents and carried goods that I could barely name. Frankincense from Arabia, lapis from Bactria, and spices that turned the air gold. My father was a craftsman, a maker of lacquered boxes. He used to say that every merchant who left our city carried a little piece of china with him and brought back a story in return. When I turned 20, I joined a caravan for the first time. It was a decision that frightened my mother and thrilled my heart. I was to be a record keeper, a writer of tallies and letters for a rich silk merchant named Bao Li. He was a hard man, but wise in the ways of trade. The road, he told me, is a book written in dust. If you read it with patience, it will teach you everything worth knowing. That morning, the city gates opened with the groan of iron hinges, and our caravan, 60 camels strong, set forth toward the west. The sun was still pale, a thin coin rising over tiled roofs. I turned once to look back at the city walls, tall and red like a sea of clay, and felt the weight of what I was leaving behind. Ahead of us stretched the unknown. Deserts, mountains, and stories waiting to be lived. The first days were easy. The road was busy with others like us. Merchants, monks, guards, and wanderers. Sometimes entire families traveled together, their children laughing as they rode on donkeys. We camped by rivers lined with poplars, the air sweet with spring. At night, we would light small fires, and the sound of flutes drifted softly between tents. I remember watching the sparks rise into the darkness, wondering if they would ever fall on the lands I dreamed to see. But even then, there were hints of what awaited us. Travelers returning from the west spoke of great deserts where the wind could bury a caravan in a single night, of mountain passes so high that even the stars seemed close enough to touch. Yet, in their eyes, I also saw wonder. They had seen worlds stitched together by trade. Chinese silk traded for Persian glass, Indian spices exchanged for Roman coins. They spoke of Samarkand's blue domes, of Baghdad's libraries, of Constantinople's golden spires. And I listened, letting their words draw a map inside my heart. That was the beginning. The road stretched endlessly before me, as if the world itself had unfolded like a scroll. I didn't know it then, but the Silk Road would shape my life in ways I could never imagine. It would bring me friends and enemies, love and loss, wisdom and weariness. It would teach me how vast and fragile our world truly is. And so, beneath a sky the color of porcelain, I took my first steps westward, into history, into legend, and into the endless dust of the Silk Road. The morning we left Xi'an was veiled in mist. The towers of the city seemed to float above the clouds, and the air carried that faint metallic smell that comes before sunrise. Our camels were restless, stamping their padded feet and groaning as the handlers tightened the ropes that held the loads of silk, porcelain, and tea. Merchants argued over last-minute prices, soldiers checked their weapons, and the scent of sesame oil bread drifted from a nearby stall, where someone was already cooking breakfast for the travelers who would soon vanish into the horizon. I remember how heavy my heart felt that morning. My mother had given me a small pouch of dried persimmons, tied with red string for luck. She said, "The road will change you, but don't forget where you came from." Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. I tucked the pouch close to my chest, beneath my robe, and promised I'd return. At 20, promises are easy things to make. The caravan stretched like a great snake beyond the gate. Dozens of camels, each carrying bundles wrapped in woven mats. Their bells jingled softly, a sound that would become the rhythm of my days. The guards rode horses, their armor clinking faintly as they moved. Beside them walked servants, guides, and cooks, each with a task that held the caravan together like the threads of a tapestry. There was a sense of excitement, but also unease. Once the gates closed behind us, we would belong to the road. As the sun broke through the mist, its light turned the walls of Xi'an gold. I looked back one last time, watching the banners ripple in the wind above the gate. Beyond those walls lay home, safety, and everything familiar. Ahead, a line of dust already rose where the caravan led, pointing toward the west. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The first days carried us through farmlands where peasants bent over fields of green wheat and rice. The earth was rich and dark, and the air buzzed with insects. Children ran to the roadside to watch us pass, their eyes wide at the sight of so many camels. Some of them shouted blessings. Others threw handfuls of flower petals that landed softly on our packs. At night, we camped near rivers and cooked rice with dried meat. The fires reflected in the water, and sometimes the older men would tell stories about the road ahead. I remember a man named Kadir, a trader from the western lands. He spoke Chinese slowly, with a thick accent, but his eyes were sharp and full of laughter. He carried bags of spices from Persia, cinnamon, cardamom, and saffron, and when he opened one to show me, the air filled with a scent so rich it made my head swim. "Smell this," he said, smiling. "Worth more than gold, but lighter to carry." I didn't know then that the world could be measured not only in distance but in fragrance, taste, and color. As days turned to weeks, the villages grew smaller and farther apart. The road hardened beneath our feet, and the air grew dry. I learned how to walk in rhythm with the camels, to save energy, to breathe through cloth when the dust rose. Every few days, we stopped at inns and way stations where other caravans rested. There were always new faces: Buddhist monks on pilgrimage, hunters with falcons, and storytellers who earned food by singing of ancient emperors and forgotten wars. The nights were full of sound: laughter, whispers, the shuffle of hooves, and the faint music of distant flutes. One evening, Bao Li, the master of our caravan, sat beside me by the fire. The flames danced on his weathered face. "The road," he said, "tests everyone differently. Some lose their patience. Others lose their faith. The wise ones," he paused, staring into the dark, "learn to listen to the silence between the dunes." I didn't yet understand what he meant, but his words stayed with me as all good lessons do. They waited quietly until I was ready to hear them. A few days later, we reached the last outpost before the desert. The air was drier there, the horizon wide and pale. The markets were full of travelers stocking up on water, ropes, and dried dates. The walls of the city were built from clay and sun, and the wind carried the smell of dust and sweat. I could sense that beyond this place lay something vast and merciless. The real journey was about to begin. That night I couldn't sleep. The desert waited outside the gates like a silent beast, breathing softly in the dark. I listened to the camels grumble in their pens and wondered what the next weeks would bring. I thought of home, of my mother's hands, of the promise I had made. Then I looked at the stars, brighter than I had ever seen them, and felt something shift inside me. A strange calm, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. At dawn, the horns sounded again. The gates opened, and for the first time, I saw the edge of the Gobi Desert, stretching endlessly before us. Golden, silent, and full of secrets. The desert began quietly. At first, it was just sand scattered between patches of dry grass, the earth turning pale beneath our feet. Then, without warning, the world opened into an endless ocean of gold. The horizon curved like the back of a sleeping beast, and the sky above was an empty bowl of blue. The noise of the city, the chatter of merchants, even the songs of birds, everything was gone. Only the soft hiss of the wind and the groan of camels remained. The Gobi Desert has a way of humbling a man. The air itself feels older there, as if it remembers every traveler who ever crossed it. Each step sinks deep into the sand, and the dunes shift beneath you like waves in slow motion. The sun is merciless. It burns your thoughts until only the most stubborn remain. During the day, the air ripples with heat, and mirages dance on the horizon. Cities of glass that vanish when you blink. At night, the temperature falls sharply, and the stars seem close enough to pluck from the sky. We learned to move like shadows. The caravan walked at dawn and dusk, resting through the cruelest hours of noon. The camels, patient creatures with long-lashed eyes, carried their burdens without complaint. Their footsteps made a deep, rhythmic sound, thump, sigh, thump, that seemed to echo forever. I began to understand why travelers called them the ships of the desert. Without them, none of us would have survived. During one evening rest, when the air cooled and the first stars appeared, the men gathered around a small fire made of dried camel dung. The flames barely flickered, but the warmth was welcome. Kadir, the spice merchant, leaned forward, his face glowing in the orange light. "Do you know," he said, "that the desert is alive?" He pointed toward the darkness. "They say spirits wander there, travelers who lost their way. If you listen closely at night, you can hear them calling for water." I laughed softly, thinking it was just a story to pass the time. But later, when I lay beneath my blanket, I thought I heard whispers in the wind. A soft, broken sound, half human, half something else. The desert has a voice, I realized, and it speaks in secrets. Days passed. The sun burned through our robes. The sand got into everything. Our food, our water, our skin. Our lips cracked from dryness, and our shadows grew thin. One of the younger guards fainted from heat. We poured water on his face and lifted him onto a camel. Every drop we used felt like gold slipping through our fingers. By evening, our flasks were lighter, and Baoli's face grew darker with worry. "We must reach the next well by tomorrow," he said, "or the desert will take its share." That night, as we camped near a cluster of rocks, I couldn't sleep. The dunes glowed faintly under the moonlight, their shapes shifting with the wind. Somewhere far off, I thought I saw movement, a faint line of figures gliding across the sand. For a moment, I believed it was another caravan. But then, as I watched, they faded into nothing. Only the wind remained, whispering softly against the dunes. In the morning, the air turned hazy. A storm was coming. The sky grew pale, then brown, as if the earth itself had begun to rise. Bao Li shouted orders, his voice barely audible over the rising howl of wind. We wrapped our faces with cloth, clutched the reins of our camels, and pressed forward. The world disappeared into a whirl of sand. I couldn't see more than a few steps ahead. The storm screamed like a living thing, and every grain of sand stung my skin like fire. For hours we stumbled through that storm, half blind, half deaf. I felt the weight of fear settle in my chest. Then, slowly, the wind began to weaken. The storm passed, leaving the world silent again. We were coated in dust, our eyes red, our lips bleeding. But we were alive. The desert had tested us, and for now it had spared us. When we finally reached the well the next day, I fell to my knees beside it. The water was warm and tasted faintly of salt, but it was the sweetest thing I had ever drunk. The camels crowded around, snorting and groaning, and the men laughed with relief. The sound of laughter after days of silence felt like a blessing. That night, as the stars returned, I lay awake watching them. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and unknowable. I thought about all the travelers who had walked this same path before me, how their footprints had long vanished, how their names were forgotten, yet their spirits still wandered here. Somewhere, in that endless sea of sand, I felt their presence, guiding, watching, whispering. The road ahead was still long, but I was no longer afraid. The desert had stripped away everything unnecessary: fear, pride, haste, and left behind something quieter, a kind of peace. And when the dawn came, painting the dunes in shades of gold and rose, I mounted my camel again, ready to follow the road wherever it would lead. The Taklamakan. Even saying the name made the traders shiver. The locals called it the Desert of No Return, and for good reason. It is a sea of sand so vast, so unending, that it swallows footsteps and echoes alike. The dunes rise like mountains of gold, shifting constantly with the wind, hiding wells, paths, and sometimes entire caravans. Many who entered the desert unprepared never returned, leaving behind only traces that the wind would erase. We approached its edge with caution. Bao Li, our caravan master, spoke rarely, his eyes scanning the horizon. The air grew drier with every step, and the camel's steady rhythm seemed louder in the emptiness. Even the sun felt heavier here, burning through the thin fabric of our robes and making our skin tingle with heat. Kadir, ever the storyteller, leaned toward me as we walked. They say, he whispered, that at night the desert breathes. Travelers hear voices calling for water, and the mirages take the shape of tents and fires. Some follow only to vanish forever. On the first night, the mirages began. As we set up camp, I thought I saw a faint flicker of fire far to the east. At first, I believed it was another caravan, perhaps resting after their day's travel. But when we rode closer, there was nothing, only shifting sand and the pale light of stars. I felt a chill run down my spine. The desert was alive, it seemed, and it knew our presence. We moved slowly, in a single line, letting the camels pick their paths through the dunes. The sand was soft and deceptive. One misstep could cause a camel to stumble, and sometimes hours would pass before we found solid ground. We drank sparingly, measuring every drop, and rationed our food carefully. The nights were bitterly cold, and I learned to wrap my cloak tightly, tucking my face into the folds to keep the wind from stealing my breath. On the third day, we encountered a traveler who had lost his way. He was a Persian merchant, covered in dust, barely able to speak. Bao Li ordered us to give him water and bread. He told us that he had been wandering for days, guided only by the stars, and had seen others vanish before his eyes. The stories were not just warnings, they were reality. His eyes, wide with fear, haunted me long after he rested and departed. The desert had claimed something from him, something invisible yet undeniable. At night, around the campfire, the older merchants told tales of ghost caravans. They spoke of travelers who had been swallowed by sandstorms, only to return centuries later as wandering spirits. Some carried their goods still, their camels skeletal, their eyes glowing faintly. I listened in silence, feeling the wind whisper through the dunes, as if confirming every word. Even Bao Li, normally stoic, nodded slowly. "Every step here is a gift," he said. "Survive, and the desert teaches you more than any city ever could." Days merged into nights. The sandstorms came without warning, whipping grains into our faces and blinding us. We moved with difficulty, guided only by the faint traces of the tracks we left behind. The desert tested every skill, every nerve. I began to understand patience in a way I never had before. I learned to follow the camel's instincts, to read the wind, and to find meaning in the silence that stretched endlessly around us. Amid the hardship, there were moments of surreal beauty. Dunes glowed golden under the rising sun, turning shadows into waves of amber. At dusk, the sky ignited with colors I had never seen before. Crimson, violet, and deep indigo blending over the horizon. For brief moments, the desert was no longer hostile. It became a cathedral of light and silence. And in those moments, I felt small and infinite all at once. By the seventh night, we reached a rare oasis, a cluster of palms surrounding a small, sparkling pool. The camels drank eagerly, and we too lowered ourselves to the water, feeling our parched bodies finally relax. Bao Li allowed a rare smile. "The desert always demands its price," he said, "but it also offers its rewards. Remember this always." I sat under the palms, listening to the water ripple softly, thinking of the travelers before me, of those who had vanished and those who had survived. The Taklamakan was more than sand and wind. It was a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to countless stories of courage, loss, and endurance. And for the first time, I felt that I was beginning to understand the road, not just as a path westward, but as a journey through the very heart of the world itself. The next morning, the caravan rose with the sun. Beyond the oasis, the dunes stretched again, pale and unbroken. We mounted our camels, water bottles full, supplies balanced, and moved forward, leaving only footprints and the faint echo of our presence. Ahead lay Kashgar, the city of markets and merchants, and a world brimming with life, color, and voices from lands far beyond our imagination. After the relentless gold of the Taklamakan, the sight of Kashgar felt like stepping into a different world entirely. From a distance, the city rose like a jewel in the sunlight, its flat-roofed houses clustered together, punctuated by tall minarets and domes glazed in turquoise and cobalt. The air smelled of spices, smoke, and fresh bread, a stark contrast to the dusty scent of the desert we had left behind. Birds circled overhead, and the call to prayer echoed faintly from the tallest tower, a melodic sound that mingled with the murmur of merchants arranging their goods. Entering the city gates, our caravan became part of a bustling river of people. Traders from India wore turbans of bright colors. Persians in long robes carried silk and silver, while Arabs haggled over spices with voices raised in laughter and argument. I was stunned by the variety of faces, languages, and smells. It was as though every corner of the known world had funneled into this single market. Bao Li led our camels down narrow streets, expertly weaving between carts, animals, and pedestrians, his experience commanding respect from locals who recognized the caravan's significance. Kashgar was a city of movement and negotiation. Stalls overflowed with goods I had never imagined. Carpets with intricate patterns, jars of preserved fruits, delicate glass bottles filled with perfumes, and fabrics dyed in colors so deep they seemed impossible. The spice market alone was a sensory overload. Cardamom, saffron, cloves, and cumin mingled in the air, creating a scent that clung to clothing and hair. Kadir, ever fascinated, ran his fingers over bundles of saffron and laughed. "Smell that," he said, inhaling deeply. "This is the heart of trade. Here, east meets west, and every smell tells a story." Amid the chaos, there was rhythm. Animals and humans moved in patterns almost invisible to the untrained eye. Camels knelt to unload, merchants gestured in precise motions, and the buyers moved with intent, eyes scanning for value. I began to see the subtle negotiations, the slight bow of a head, the tilt of a coin, the way a piece of silk was draped just so. Every interaction held a lesson in trust, risk, and calculation. That evening, after the sun had dipped behind the surrounding mountains, the caravan settled near a quiet square, where a fountain whispered over carved stone. Baoli arranged for the camels to rest, while the men wandered toward food stalls and tea houses. I followed Kadir, drawn by the clatter of cups and the aroma of roasted lamb. We found a small tea house tucked into a corner, where a Persian musician played a delicate tune on a stringed instrument. The music seemed to capture the spirit of the city, restless, diverse, yet strangely harmonious. As we sipped sweet tea, a merchant approached Bao Li with a map. He spoke quickly in a mix of Persian and Chinese, pointing to distant cities and trading posts. Bao Li listened carefully, nodding at certain points. I realized then that the Silk Road was not just a path through geography. It was a network of information, rumors, opportunities. One wrong turn could mean disaster. One insight could bring fortune. Each city, each trader, held secrets and knowledge as valuable as any cargo. Night fell, and the city took on a different character. Lanterns glowed softly, illuminating courtyards and alleys. Children played among shadows. Women in embroidered robes moved silently between homes, and the distant call of night watchmen echoed through stone streets. Kadir leaned close and whispered, "Some say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the desert calling even here, reminding you that Kashgar is only a pause, a breath, not the journey itself." I nodded, feeling the pull of the road already tugging at my heart. The next morning, we set out for the surrounding mountains, where the path would lead to the Pamir Plateau. Merchants packed their remaining goods, camels were loaded once more, and the city receded behind us, its noises replaced by the gentle sigh of the wind through grasslands. Yet even as we moved forward, Kashgar lingered in my mind. The scents, the colors, the endless movement of people and ideas. It was a reminder that the Silk Road was more than sand and distance. It was a living, breathing world, full of stories, whispers, and possibilities. Ahead lay snow-capped peaks, treacherous passes, and the cold of the high mountains. But for now, I let my thoughts linger on the vibrant streets, the foreign merchants, and the lessons the city had quietly whispered to me. The journey continued, and with every step, I felt the road teaching me more about the world and about myself. The mountains rose like silent sentinels, jagged and imposing, their peaks kissed by clouds that never seemed to move. We left the rolling hills behind us and entered a land where the air thinned with every step, and even the camels seemed to strain against the incline. The Pamir Plateau was known as the roof of the world, and it demanded respect. Here, the road was no longer soft sand or bustling city streets, but sharp stones, icy streams, and narrow passes that tested every ounce of endurance. From the first day, I felt the cold settle deep in my bones. Nights were bitter, the wind slicing through our layers of cloth and leather. We huddled around small fires, and even the camels seemed reluctant to move. Breathing became a conscious effort. Every step upward took energy we did not know we had. Yet, despite the hardship, there was an undeniable beauty. The snow reflected the sky's pale light, and distant peaks shimmered in hues of silver and rose. Streams trickled down from glaciers, their water clear and freezing, and the silence was absolute except for the occasional crack of shifting stone. Local guides joined us here, nomads with sharp eyes and quiet movements. They spoke little, but their knowledge of the terrain was unmatched. They showed us hidden paths where avalanches were unlikely, where the sun would warm our bodies for at least an hour, and where small caves could offer shelter during sudden storms. One evening, an old guide told me about the mountain spirits, the benevolent yet fickle beings who guarded the passes. "They are always watching," he said. "Respect them, or the mountains will remind you who rules here." I listened, unsure if he meant myth or warning. In the mountains, I soon realized, myth often felt more real than reality itself. The caravan moved slowly, and the days blurred together. We crossed narrow ridges where a single misstep could send a camel tumbling hundreds of feet below. At night, when the fires burned low, stories of travelers who had disappeared in these mountains circled the camp. Merchants spoke of lost caravans, frozen solid in the snow, their goods scattered and taken by wolves or the wind. One tale told of a single traveler who vanished in a storm, only to reappear days later, claiming the spirits had guided him to a secret valley where wild apricots grew. The elders nodded solemnly at each story, their eyes reflecting the firelight and the caution it carried. I learned to respect the mountains with every step. The air grew thinner, making conversation difficult. Each breath burned in my lungs, and fatigue became a constant companion. Yet there were moments of quiet wonder. I remember watching the sun rise behind a jagged ridge, painting the snow in gold and violet. A small herd of ibex appeared on a distant cliff, moving with effortless grace. The silence of the mountains felt sacred, as if we were intruders in a world that had existed for centuries untouched. The nights were coldest of all. Frost formed on our blankets, and ice hung from the edges of tents. Camels huddled together for warmth, their large bodies radiating faint heat. I often lay awake, staring at the sky, feeling small and fragile beneath the vast dome of stars. The mountains whispered, in wind and rock and shadow, stories of endurance and survival. I began to understand that the Silk Road was not just a path for merchants. It was a teacher of resilience, patience, and humility. By the 5th day, we reached a pass high enough to overlook the surrounding valleys. I stood on a cliff's edge, the cold wind biting my face, and looked down at the world stretching beneath us. It was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Snow-capped peaks, winding rivers, and distant settlements that seemed impossibly small. Kadir, ever the optimist, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "This is why we travel. Not for goods, not for wealth, but for this view, this feeling. Few ever see the world from here." I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride, awe, and a quiet fear of what lay ahead. The mountains did not forgive mistakes. One of the younger merchants slipped on ice near a narrow pass, but with quick hands and steady ropes, we saved him from certain death. The incident left us shaken, a silent reminder of how fragile life could be in these heights. Each day became a careful dance, measuring every step, trusting our guides, and listening to the mountain's quiet warnings. As we descended into the valleys leading toward Samarkand, the cold eased slightly, replaced by dry wind and the earthy scent of distant grasslands. We left the highest peaks behind, but their lessons stayed with me. The value of caution, the humility of survival, and the awe of witnessing a world that seemed to touch the sky. Even as the plains below spread out before us, I knew that the mountains had changed me. Every grain of sand in the desert, every step in the dunes, had prepared me for this. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the stillness, the danger, and the beauty of the Pamirs. The road westward called again, and we answered, hearts heavier and wiser than before, heading toward the jewel of Central Asia, Samarkand. As the plains unfolded before us, the air began to warm, carrying the faint scent of fertile soil and distant orchards. On the horizon, Samarkand rose like a mirage made real, its minarets and domes catching the sun in flashes of turquoise and gold. The city seemed alive from afar, a jewel nestled between mountains and desert, where traders, scholars, and travelers converged from every corner of the known world. For those of us who had crossed the desert and scaled the Pamirs, it felt like stepping into the heart of civilization itself. Entering Samarkand, I was immediately struck by the noise and energy. Horses clattered along cobbled streets, carts creaked under heavy loads of silk and spices, and merchants shouted prices in dozens of languages. Persian, Arabic, Chinese, and Turkic tongues intertwined, creating a chorus that was almost musical. The markets were dizzying, stalls overflowing with carpets, textiles, jewels, and ceramics, each more intricate than the last. The scent of fried bread, roasted lamb, and exotic spices clung to the air. My senses were overwhelmed, yet each sight and sound reminded me that the road we traveled was not just a physical journey, but a tapestry of human life. Baoli guided the caravan through the streets with practiced ease. He knew which merchants were honest, which paths were safe, and which neighborhoods demanded caution. I followed him closely, learning to read the subtle signs of trust and suspicion in this foreign city. Kadir, meanwhile, darted from stall to stall, inhaling spices, examining silks, and negotiating with merchants in his booming, accented voice. Watching him, I realized that trade was as much about charm and understanding as it was about goods. That evening, after our camels were rested and our loads secured, Baoli took me to Registan Square, the heart of Samarkand. The massive madrasas, covered in intricate mosaics of blues, greens, and golds, rose on three sides of the square. I had never seen architecture like this. Domes painted with stars and suns, calligraphy curling across walls like living script, and geometric patterns so precise they seemed impossible. Lanterns flickered as the sun set, casting shadows that danced across the mosaics. Inside one madrasa, a group of scholars and poets gathered. They read verses in low, measured tones, while musicians played instruments I had never seen, the strings humming and vibrating in perfect resonance. The sound was hypnotic, weaving with the rhythm of the city outside. Baoli whispered that these gatherings were more than entertainment. They were forums of learning, debate, and diplomacy. Traders often used them to gain insight into distant lands, as the poets and scholars had connections far beyond Samarkand's walls. That night, as I walked through narrow streets toward our guest house, I overheard stories that blurred history and legend. An old man claimed that Samarkand had been built on the tears of an emperor who dreamed of a city that could outshine the stars. Another spoke of a merchant who had traveled to India and returned with a carpet woven entirely of silk threads so fine it was almost invisible. I listened in awe, realizing that every city on the Silk Road carried myths alongside reality, and that sometimes the myths told more about human desire than facts ever could. In the quiet hours before dawn, I climbed to the roof of our guest house. The city lay beneath me, calm and glowing under the stars. I could see the minarets cutting into the night sky, hear the distant laughter of early risers, and smell the faint aroma of bread baking in the ovens. Samarkand was a crossroads, a place where cultures collided, mingled, and created something enduring. I felt privileged to witness it, yet I knew our stay was temporary. The road westward waited, and with it, more deserts, mountains, and cities whose names I had only heard in whispers. As the first light of morning painted the domes in gold, Baoli called the caravan to prepare. The city gates opened once more, and we moved toward the lands of Bactria and the Oxus River, where new adventures awaited. I mounted my camel, feeling the pulse of the road beneath me, and understood that every step, every city, every encounter was shaping not just the journey, but the traveler himself. Samarkand had taught me lessons in beauty, in human ingenuity, and in the power of stories. Ahead lay the unknown, and with each mile, I carried a piece of the city in my mind, a memory of color, sound, and the endless possibilities of the Silk Road. Leaving Samarkand behind, the caravan moved toward the fertile plains of Bactria, a land where history seemed to seep from the soil itself. The mountains receded into the distance, and rivers wound through fields of wheat and barley, reflecting sunlight like silver ribbons. The air smelled of damp earth and ripening fruit, a welcome change from the dry winds of the Pamirs. Here, the Silk Road took on a different rhythm, less harsh yet no less demanding. As we traveled, we met traders from distant lands. A caravan of Persians passed us, their camels laden with precious stones and woven rugs. Their leader, a tall man with a dark turban and eyes sharp as flint, nodded at Bao Li with respect. We exchanged news of roads, rivers, and passes, learning which routes had been blocked by floods or bandits. It was clear that every journey on the Silk Road relied not just on endurance, but on networks of knowledge shared among those who dared to travel. The Bactrian people themselves were a study in contrasts. Some villages were composed of mud brick houses with courtyards filled with grazing goats, while others were bustling trading posts, full of merchants from China, Persia, and even the distant Mediterranean. At each stop, we bartered for fresh bread, salted fish, and jars of milk. Children ran alongside our camels, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Old men watched silently from doorways, their eyes following the procession with quiet curiosity. One evening, as we camped near a river, Bao Li and Kadir gathered the younger traders around a fire. They shared tales of lost caravans, some swallowed by sudden mountain storms, others vanished in desert sands, never to be seen again. One story spoke of a caravan that had traveled this very route years ago, carrying silk and silver. They had disappeared in a narrow valley, and the only trace left was a single camel's bell, found years later, tarnished and bent by wind and rain. I shivered as the firelight flickered across Bao Li's weathered face. "The road is alive," he said quietly. "It remembers those who travel it, and sometimes it does not forgive." Despite the warnings, the journey continued. The terrain shifted between soft plains and rocky outcroppings, and the days grew warmer. Streams offered moments of respite, and I watched the camels kneel to drink, their heads dipping into the cool water. Nights were spent under clear skies, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of stars. In those quiet hours, I listened to the wind rustling through reeds and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The road seemed endless, yet every night brought a sense of progress, a step closer to the next city, the next river, the next story. One afternoon, we reached a small trading post where merchants whispered of a caravan that had gone missing in the mountains to the north. The story was unsettling. Travelers had vanished without a trace, their camels found wandering alone among jagged rocks. Some said the mountains themselves had claimed them. Others insisted bandits had been the cause. Bao Li, when he heard the tale, frowned and examined his maps carefully, marking the route with extra caution. He reminded us that no story on the Silk Road was mere gossip. Many carried truths hidden beneath layers of fear and superstition. At night, we camped under the shadow of ancient ruins, possibly remnants of kingdoms that had risen and fallen centuries before. Stones carved with inscriptions hinted at a civilization long forgotten. I imagined the lives of those who had once walked these paths, their voices carried by the wind, blending with ours. The road was not just a journey through space. It was a journey through time, connecting past and present with every mile we traveled. By the time we reached the Oxus River, its waters wide and calm, the caravan was weary but alive. Camels drank greedily, and traders filled their flasks, refilling their spirits along with their supplies. The river marked both an end and a beginning, the final leg through fertile valleys and forests before the mountains rose again to meet us. I watched the current ripple over smooth stones, thinking about the stories of those who had crossed it before, and the countless more who would follow the same path long after we were gone. The journey through Bactria had been both gentle and warning-filled, offering moments of beauty and reminders of danger. As we prepared to cross the next mountain range, I felt the weight of the road pressing forward, urging us to learn, to endure, and to keep moving. The Silk Road demanded nothing less than attention, respect, and courage from those who dared to traverse it. The mountains of Bactria rose abruptly from the fertile plains, jagged and unyielding, their peaks dusted with snow even in the warmer months. The caravan slowed as we approached the foothills, each step heavier than the last. The terrain was treacherous. Narrow paths clinging to cliffs, icy streams that refused to be crossed easily, and sudden drops that could swallow a camel in an instant. Bao Li's voice was steady but firm as he guided us along the winding trail, teaching patience with every step. As the sun began to sink behind the peaks, shadows stretched long across the rocks. The air grew colder, biting at exposed skin, and the wind howled through the passes like an angry spirit. Camels huddled together for warmth, their breath steaming in the frigid air. I wrapped my cloak tightly around my face, trying to shield my cheeks from the icy gusts. Even Kadir, ever the optimist, was unusually quiet, his eyes scanning the slopes for hidden dangers. That night, while the men built fires, I noticed figures moving along a distant ridge. At first, I thought they were bandits, eyes gleaming in the firelight. But as we watched, the figures approached cautiously, their steps deliberate and slow. They were travelers like us, yet unlike any we had seen. Dressed in heavy furs, carrying strange instruments and bundles that suggested long journeys. Bao Li greeted them with nods, and a brief exchange of words revealed they were merchants from the far north, from lands where snow never fully melted. The northern merchants shared stories around our joint campfire. They spoke of frozen rivers that acted as highways in winter, of mountain spirits that guided lost travelers back to safety, and of valleys where gold dust sparkled in streams. Some stories were wondrous, others terrifying. One merchant described a storm that had come without warning, burying a caravan in snow so quickly that no trace remained for months. Another spoke of a hidden pass where travelers heard whispers in the wind, believed to be the voices of those who had vanished long ago. As we listened, the wind carried the scent of pine and ice, and the firelight flickered across faces worn by travel and weather. The mountains themselves seemed alive, breathing over the valley, moving with a presence that could not be ignored. Every shadow looked like a spirit, every howl of wind a warning. I realized that here, in these high passes, myth and reality blended seamlessly. To survive was to respect both, and to move with caution was to honor the land itself. The following days were slow and exhausting. Snow began to fall lightly, then heavier, blanketing the path in white. Every step required concentration, and every misstep risked a fall. Camels, though steady, struggled with the slippery stones, their hooves sliding over ice and gravel. Baoli taught us how to tie ropes around the pack animals, creating a safety line that would prevent a disaster. Each mile was a test of skill, endurance, and nerve. One evening, as we reached a narrow pass with cliffs towering above us, a sudden snowstorm engulfed the caravan. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The world became a white void, and the roar of the wind drowned out all other sound. We huddled close to our camels, moving slowly, following Bao Li's commands and the faint traces of tracks left behind. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the blizzard, each minute a challenge, each step a victory. In the heart of the storm, I thought of the ghost stories shared by the northern merchants. Whispers seemed to echo in the wind, though whether real or imagined, I could not tell. It was as if the mountains themselves tested our resolve, measuring our courage and patience. Every traveler must face these trials, I realized, for the Silk Road rewards those who endure, yet never forgets those who falter. By dawn, the storm had passed. The mountains sparkled under the rising sun, snow melting into rivulets that trickled down the slopes. Our footprints marked the path through the white, evidence of struggle and survival. Camels shook off the snow, their breath misting in the crisp morning air. Baoli looked at the caravan and nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement of our collective effort. As we descended toward the lower valleys leading to the Oxus River, I felt a deep respect for these mountains. They demanded patience, skill, and humility, and gave back lessons in endurance, awareness, and courage. Each step on this road seemed to carve a mark not just in the earth, but in the traveler himself. The Silk Road was no longer merely a path of trade. It was a path of transformation, shaping those who dared to walk it through desert, oasis, and mountain alike. The descent from the Bactrian Mountains brought us to the banks of the Oxus River, its waters wide, calm, and glimmering under the afternoon sun. After the harsh cold of the high passes, the warmth here felt almost luxurious. Camels drank eagerly, and merchants filled their flasks. Baoli reminded us that rivers were not just sources of water. They were lifelines, carrying news, goods, and travelers across vast distances. The banks of the Oxus were dotted with small villages and trading posts, where farmers grew wheat, barley, and grapes. Children waved from the riverbanks, shouting greetings in languages I couldn't recognize. Fishermen mended nets along the shallow edges, while women carried baskets of fresh produce and bread. The air was fragrant with the scent of baked goods and ripening fruit, a welcome change from the dry wind and dust of the deserts behind us. Merchants from distant lands converged here. Persian traders brought saffron, silk, and ceramics, while local Bactrians offered livestock and dried fruits. I watched as negotiations unfolded, hands gesturing, coins exchanged, goods weighed, and subtle nods that spoke volumes. The market was alive with energy, a testament to the enduring power of the Silk Road as more than a route. It was a living network of commerce and connection. One evening, as we camped near the riverbank, Baoli gathered the caravan to share news he had overheard from other travelers. Stories circulated of bandits further west, preying on lone caravans who ventured too far from the main routes. Tales of lost goods and missing travelers reminded us that the road was never safe, even near populated areas. Kadir, leaning against his camel, laughed nervously, muttering, "And yet we continue, drawn forward by curiosity and profit." I realized he was right. The Silk Road demanded courage, not recklessness, but courage nonetheless. The river itself had a rhythm to it, a pulse that mirrored the movement of the caravan. Early mornings brought mist that rose like smoke from its surface, hiding the water and turning familiar landmarks into ghostly shapes. At times, the fog created illusions of floating boats or figures walking along the river's edge. Travelers whispered of spirits who lingered near the banks, guarding secrets or guiding the worthy. Whether real or imagined, the stories reminded us to respect the river as much as the mountains or deserts. On the fourth day along the Oxus, we encountered a caravan of traders from far-off lands, dressed in colorful robes and carrying strange goods. Spices I had never smelled, fabrics dyed with deep, impossible blues, and intricate metalwork that reflected the sun in dazzling patterns. Baoli exchanged greetings and news, and we learned that these merchants were headed toward Bukhara, one of the legendary cities of trade and learning. Their tales of distant lands, Persia, India, and even China, made the road feel infinitely long yet connected by a single thread of commerce and human ambition. Night brought stars so bright I had never seen in the deserts or mountains. The river reflected their light, doubling the expanse of the heavens. Around the campfire, the merchants shared stories, some fanciful, some chilling. One told of a traveler who had followed the river too far and stumbled into a hidden gorge, surviving only by the guidance of an old shepherd who seemed almost like a spirit. Another spoke of a merchant who had transported silk from Chang'an to Constantinople in record time, earning both fortune and fame, yet never stopping to rest, his journey becoming legend along the road. The Oxus carried more than water. It carried tales, secrets, and connections across lands far and wide. Each bend in the river promised both opportunity and danger. For travelers like us, it was a corridor of life, of commerce, and of lessons waiting to be learned. Baoli reminded us again, every river has its currents, visible or hidden. Respect them and you may pass safely. Ignore them, and they will teach you harshly. As we prepared to leave the river behind and begin the next leg of the journey toward Bukhara, I felt a growing awareness of the road's dual nature. It was both giver and taker, a force that tested endurance, patience, and insight. Every river, mountain, and city had its own rhythm and challenges. And in the quiet moments, I realized that the journey along the Silk Road was shaping us as much as it shaped the land itself. The next morning, with the Oxus fading behind us, the caravan moved westward, toward new cities, new markets, and new stories waiting to be discovered. I could feel the pulse of the road beneath me, urging forward into the unknown, where adventure and danger were never far apart. As the caravan approached Bukhara, the city revealed itself gradually, rising from the horizon like a mirage made tangible. Its walls, built of sun-baked bricks, glowed golden in the late afternoon sun. Minarets and domes pierced the skyline, some tiled in turquoise, others in shades of deep cobalt. The city exuded a sense of permanence, of history etched into every stone. It was not merely a hub of trade. It was a center of learning, poetry, and culture, a place where the world converged in commerce and intellect alike. Entering the city gates, we were swallowed by a bustling network of streets, stalls, and alleys. Merchants called out in various languages, offering goods that dazzled the eyes. Hand-woven carpets with intricate patterns, jars of rare spices, gold-threaded silks, and ceramics painted with scenes from distant lands. The scent of bread baking, roasted lamb, and fragrant oils mingled in the warm air. Even the camels seemed to move slower, as if soaking in the richness of this city after the harsh journey along the Oxus. Baoli led our caravan with precise steps, navigating through narrow streets and open squares where scholars debated, poets recited verses, and musicians played on instruments with strings, flutes, and drums. I watched in awe as traders exchanged news of distant lands, Persia, India, and even China, gossip and intelligence as valuable as gold. Every interaction was layered with negotiation, subtle gestures, and the quiet acknowledgement that Bukhara was both a marketplace and a school of diplomacy. By late afternoon, We reached Liabai Haws, the famous pool surrounded by mulberry trees and madrasas. Merchants, students, and travelers rested here, their conversations floating over the water in a mixture of languages. I noticed storytellers recounting legends of ancient kings, while musicians filled the air with haunting melodies. The calm of the pool contrasted sharply with the city's energy, offering a rare moment of reflection amid the chaos of trade. That evening, Bao Li invited us to a gathering in one of the madrasas. Scholars and poets had come from far and wide, discussing astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and literature. I listened to their debates, amazed at the breadth of knowledge exchanged in a single room. One poet recited a verse about a trader who had carried silk from Chang'an to Constantinople, his journey immortalized in rhyme. The lines spoke not just of commerce, but of endurance, courage, and the human desire to connect across vast distances. Yet even in this city of learning and culture, danger and uncertainty were never far away. Whispers circulated among traders about western routes plagued by bandits and rogue states, some stretching far beyond familiar maps. Bao Li's eyes darkened slightly as he listened, and he reminded us that knowledge was only as useful as caution allowed. Every city had its own rhythm, and the road beyond Bukhara demanded both courage and wisdom. In the nights, I wandered through the streets, listening to the faint hum of life, children laughing, the soft murmur of scholars in discussion, and merchants counting coins by lantern light. The city seemed to pulse with history, a living mosaic of stories, commerce, and human endeavor. I realized that the Silk Road was not merely a route of goods, but a river of culture, ideas, and legends flowing through the ages. By dawn, the caravan prepared to leave, loading camels once more with spices, silk, and metalwork destined for western lands. We paused briefly at the city gates, taking in the sight of Bukhara, the markets, madrasas, and quiet courtyards fading behind us. Ahead lay the deserts and rivers leading to Persia, with new challenges, new cities, and new stories waiting to be discovered. As we rode west, I reflected on Bukhara's lessons. That trade was inseparable from culture, that knowledge and wisdom traveled alongside silk and spices, and that every city was a teacher in its own right. The Silk Road stretched endlessly, and with each mile, I felt the journey shaping me as much as I shaped my understanding of the world. Leaving the fertile valleys behind, the caravan entered the Kyzylkum Desert, a vast expanse of red and gold sand stretching as far as the eye could see. The transition from lush plains to arid wasteland was abrupt. The air became dry and sharp, and the sun hung high and merciless during the day. Even the camels, accustomed to long journeys, seemed to move with slower deliberation, conserving energy against the endless dunes. From the first day, the desert revealed its deceptive nature. Shimmering mirages appeared on the horizon, creating illusions of rivers, oases, or distant settlements. Travelers, weary from the unrelenting sun, would sometimes believe they had spotted water, only to find empty sand when they approached. Bao Li warned us repeatedly, "The desert tests the mind before the body. Keep your wits, or it will take more than your strength." I understood immediately. The road here demanded vigilance as much as endurance. The caravan fell into a rhythm dictated by the desert. We traveled in the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, resting at midday when the sun scorched the sand. Camels knelt, their humps rising and falling with deep breaths, while we drank from flasks filled at the last oasis. The horizon remained both distant and unreachable, a constant reminder of the road ahead. Kadir, ever restless, would sometimes wander ahead, scanning the dunes for signs of life, his shadow stretching across the sand in the long evening light. Despite the harsh conditions, the desert was alive. Small lizards scuttled across stones, and hawks circled high above, riding invisible currents of wind. Occasional desert foxes darted between dunes, leaving fleeting footprints in the sand. At night, the temperature dropped sharply, and the sky unfolded into a vast, star-strewn canopy. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens, mirrored faintly by the glittering sand in moonlight. I often lay awake, feeling both insignificance and awe, realizing that every step through the desert was a lesson in humility. Stories of lost caravans haunted the journey. Travelers spoke of merchants swallowed by sudden sandstorms, their goods scattered and camels left wandering alone. One tale described a caravan that had vanished for weeks, only to be found near an oasis with no recollection of how they survived. Some whispered of desert spirits guiding the worthy or punishing the foolish, their presence felt in the shifting sand and the eerie stillness that could fall without warning. Midway through the desert, we came across a small group of wandering merchants, their camels carrying rare spices and precious metals. They shared tales of distant lands, Persia, the Caspian Sea, and even the cities of the Black Sea. Their stories were filled with both wonder and caution. Treacherous river crossings, mountain passes blocked by bandits, and cities where hospitality and danger coexisted. Listening to them, I realized that the Silk Road was not just a physical route but a network of knowledge, where information traveled as quickly as goods. Oases appeared like jewels in the sand, each one a lifeline. Palm trees offered shade, fresh water flowed, and small markets emerged where traders could barter and rest. Bowley emphasized the importance of these stops. A missed oasis could mean dehydration or worse. At each one, caravans exchanged news, replenished supplies, and shared warnings. It was in these moments, surrounded by the fragile beauty of desert life, that the Silk Road's true nature became apparent. A delicate balance of risk, reward, and survival. By the seventh day, the endless dunes began to shift into rocky hills, signaling the approach of the Persian borderlands. Relief mixed with tension. The desert had been merciless, yet it had taught endurance, vigilance, and respect for the road. Camels were tired but resilient, traders wary but alert. As we rode toward the first Persian settlements, the Kyzylkum left its mark not only on our bodies but on our spirits. The desert, harsh and silent, had tested us, and only through attention, patience, and courage had we prevailed. Ahead lay cities of legend, bazaars overflowing with goods from distant continents, and rivers that would carry us deeper into the heart of the Silk Road. The journey continued, and with each step, the desert's lessons remained imprinted in our minds, guiding us westward into lands both familiar and unknown. After days of traversing the relentless Kyzylkum Desert, the first silhouette of Khiva appeared on the horizon, its walls rising abruptly from the flat sands like a fortress of time. The city was surrounded by high, mud-brick ramparts, their surfaces glowing golden under the late afternoon sun. Towers and minarets punctuated the skyline, intricate in detail yet weathered by centuries of wind and sand. The caravan quickened its pace, eager for shade, water, and the promise of civilization after the punishing desert. Entering through the city gates, we were immediately enveloped by the pulse of Khiva. The streets were narrow and winding, designed to shield inhabitants from the desert winds. Stalls overflowed with goods: saffron, dried fruits, dyed silks, and copper wares that glinted in the sunlight. Merchants shouted in Uzbek, Persian, and Turkic languages, creating a lively cacophony that blended seamlessly with the calls of muezzins from the city's minarets. Even the camels, weary from the desert, seemed to move with renewed energy, sensing the presence of water and shelter. Bowley guided us through the main bazaar, past craftsmen hammering intricate metalwork, weavers demonstrating the finest threads, and spice merchants whose scents mixed intoxicatingly with the aroma of baked bread and roasted meats. Here, trade was more than commerce. It was a theater of skill, negotiation, and trust. Kadir, ever curious, engaged with vendors eagerly, testing his persuasion skills on fabrics and spices, while I observed the delicate balance between bargaining and respect. By evening, the caravan settled into a caravanserai, a large, enclosed and designed for travelers and their animals. The courtyard filled with camels, donkeys, and travelers from distant lands. Fires were lit, and the scent of cooking filled the air. Merchants exchanged stories over tea, recounting adventures along the Silk Road. Lost caravans, hidden oases, mountain passes, and rumors of treasures waiting in the next city. One old merchant spoke of a caravan that vanished in the desert, leaving only a single camel and a bag of unsold silk as testimony to its journey. The story left a hush over the courtyard, a reminder that the road demanded respect. As night deepened, the city transformed. Lanterns cast soft light over the mud brick walls, illuminating intricate carvings and faded murals. From the minarets, the call to prayer echoed, blending with the distant hum of conversation and the soft clatter of hooves in the courtyard. I wandered through the streets, absorbing the atmosphere. The whisper of wind through narrow alleys, the glint of moonlight on tiled domes, and the quiet watchfulness of guards stationed at the gates. Khiva was alive not only in trade but in culture, legend, and history, each stone carrying the weight of centuries. Within the caravanserai, travelers shared tales that blurred myth and reality. One storyteller spoke of a desert spirit guiding lost merchants to hidden wells, rewarding those who traveled with courage and punishing those who ignored caution. Another told of secret tunnels beneath Khiva, used centuries ago by traders to smuggle goods unseen by rulers or thieves. Bowley listened intently, his eyes reflecting both amusement and the practical lessons within these stories. "Every tale has a purpose," he said. "Even the fantastical teaches you what to expect on the road." Night after night, we stayed in Khiva, each evening revealing a new layer of its character. Children chased each other along the alleys, elders debated quietly in tea houses, and merchants inspected their goods under lantern light. The city taught a lesson that even the harsh desert could not: that civilization, knowledge, and human ingenuity persisted in the most remote corners, a sanctuary for travelers daring enough to reach it. By the time we departed Khiva, the caravan had absorbed the city's lessons: vigilance in trade, respect for tradition, and the importance of alliances and information. The walls faded behind us as we mounted our camels, heading westward into the Karakum Desert and the next chapter of the journey. Even the camels seemed to recognize the continuation of the road, adjusting their steps in anticipation of the trials and wonders yet to come. Leaving the fortified walls of Khiva behind, the caravan entered the Karakum Desert, a vast, undulating sea of ochre sand stretching endlessly under the blazing sun. The desert's heat was merciless, its wind swirling fine grains into the eyes and mouths of travelers. Bowley moved the caravan with calculated care, choosing routes that offered sparse vegetation or occasional waterholes. Even the camels, accustomed to long journeys, trudged wearily through the soft sands, their hooves sinking with every step. The desert revealed its hidden dangers almost immediately. Mirage after mirage appeared on the horizon. Fleeting images of flowing rivers, lush oases, and distant cities, vanishing as we drew near. Many travelers succumbed to hope too quickly, only to find themselves staring at empty sand. Bowley warned us often, his voice steady. "The desert tests your mind before your body. See with patience, not desire." I learned quickly to distinguish between hope and reality, training my eyes to read the subtle shifts in the sand and heat haze. Despite the harsh conditions, the desert had its own fragile beauty. Twisting dunes caught the sunlight in golden waves. Small desert flowers bloomed briefly after rare rains, and the wind created shifting patterns that resembled water in motion. Birds, mostly hawks and desert falcons, soared overhead, their cries echoing across the emptiness. At night, the sky unveiled a blanket of stars so dense it felt like one could reach out and touch them. The Milky Way arched overhead, a luminous river stretching infinitely, mirrored faintly in the faint ripples of sand sculpted by the wind. Midway through the desert, we encountered a group of nomadic Turkmen, traveling with camels and carrying hides, textiles, and dried meat. Baoli approached cautiously, trading respectful greetings and learning about the conditions further west. The nomads shared stories of sandstorms that could bury entire caravans, of hidden wells marked by subtle rock formations, and of desert spirits who guided or misled travelers depending on their intentions. I noticed a careful rhythm in their speech, a blend of caution, legend, and wisdom learned over generations in this unforgiving land. During one particularly grueling afternoon, the wind rose suddenly, turning the desert into a blinding whirlwind of sand. Visibility dropped to mere meters, and the caravan moved slowly, each camel carefully placed to avoid slipping or stumbling. Bao Li's voice carried over the roar of the wind, guiding us with practiced precision. The storm tested not only our endurance but our resolve, forcing complete focus on each step, each action. It was a stark reminder that the Silk Road was not simply a passage of trade. It was a test of vigilance, courage, and adaptability. At night, in the calm between storms, the desert seemed almost serene. We camped near a rare oasis, a cluster of palms and clear water like a jewel in the sand. Around the fire, merchants shared tales of distant lands, Persia, India, and even the Mediterranean. One spoke of a caravan that had crossed the desert in record time, guided by stars and intuition, while another told of a group lost for weeks, found only when a shepherd discovered them by following animal tracks. These stories intertwined with the desert itself, blending legend and truth in a way that made every mile feel both perilous and magical. By the seventh day, signs of civilization appeared faintly on the horizon. Low hills that hinted at rivers, scattered villages, and the promise of trade posts. The journey across the Karakum had tested our bodies and minds, leaving an imprint of resilience, patience, and cautious optimism. Even the camels seemed to understand the transition, their steps lighter as they sensed water and greenery ahead. As we approached the Persian borderlands, Baoli reminded us that the deserts were but one chapter in the long journey westward. Cities, markets, rivers, and mountains awaited, each carrying their own lessons and legends. The Karakum had taught endurance, observation, and humility, qualities essential for the road, where survival depended as much on wisdom as on strength. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sands as the caravan pressed onward. Ahead lay the fertile lands of Persia, promising new markets, new stories, and new challenges. The Silk Road, vast and unpredictable, continued to unfold, each step carrying the weight of history, myth, and the shared human quest to connect distant lands. After days crossing the relentless Karakum Desert, the first signs of Persia appeared. Gentle hills, scattered groves of pistachio and almond trees, and the distant glimmer of mud brick villages. The air felt different here, warmer, more fragrant with the scent of cultivated earth and blossoming orchards. Baoli guided the caravan carefully, moving through narrow dirt roads that led to the first Persian towns, each a vibrant hub of life after the monotony of sand and sky. Our arrival in Merv, one of the great cities along the Silk Road, was a revelation. The city's walls rose tall and proud, their gates carved with intricate patterns. Merchants and travelers from distant lands bustled through the streets, shouting in Persian, Arabic, and Turkic tongues. Camels and donkeys jostled through the crowded roads, laden with silks, spices, and metalwork. Even the air seemed alive with energy, carrying the scent of saffron, roasted nuts, and the smoke of countless hearths. Baoli led the caravan through a bustling bazaar, a maze of stalls and merchants. Each stall was a microcosm of the Silk Road: Persian carpets with vibrant geometric patterns, jars of exotic spices from India, delicate glassware from Venice, and the unmistakable sheen of Chinese silk. Traders haggled with skillful precision, their voices rising and falling like music, while watchful apprentices observed and learned the subtle arts of negotiation and trust. I noticed how much knowledge traveled alongside goods. Rumors of distant lands, updates on bandit activity, and whispers about rare treasures yet unseen. Evening brought a moment of reflection as we settled near a small river running through the city. Bao Li and Kadir gathered the younger merchants around a fire. They shared tales of caravans lost in deserts and mountains, stories of rival merchants whose greed had led to disaster, and legends of cities that appeared only in dreams or mirages. One story spoke of a caravan carrying silk and silver to the Mediterranean that vanished for months, only to reappear with tales of secret oases, hidden valleys, and guides who seemed to appear from nowhere. These tales, while terrifying, reminded us that knowledge and caution were as vital as physical endurance. By nightfall, the city transformed into a mosaic of lanterns and shadows. Minarets rose against the darkening sky, and the calls of muezzins blended with the laughter of children and the murmur of scholars debating in tea-houses. The city was alive not only in trade but in culture, music, and poetry. One evening, I wandered through a courtyard where poets recited verses about merchants' journeys, intertwining reality with imagination. Their words seemed to echo the rhythm of the Silk Road itself, endless, challenging, and full of beauty. During our stay, we also met travelers from the far west, merchants who had crossed the deserts of Arabia, sailors who had sailed the Persian Gulf, and scholars who moved like whispers of knowledge between cities. Their stories were filled with exotic lands, political intrigue, and warnings of treacherous passages ahead. Baoli listened carefully, noting routes and potential hazards, emphasizing that even in Persia, the road was never truly safe. Bandits, political unrest, and natural obstacles could strike at any time. The days in Merv were filled with activity. Camels were unloaded and reloaded, goods were inspected and bartered, and traders exchanged information crucial for the continuation of the journey. At night, fires flickered in caravanserais, mixing the aroma of cooking meat with the smell of ink and paper as scholars and merchants recorded their findings, agreements, and tales. Every moment reinforced a lesson of the Silk Road. It was not merely a road, but a living network of commerce, knowledge, and human endurance. As we prepared to leave Merv, Baoli reminded the caravan that Persia's lands were fertile and inviting, yet full of hidden challenges. Ahead lay cities rich in culture and history, but also stretches of desert and mountain passes that would demand vigilance. The journey west continued, each step bringing new lessons, new risks, and new connections. The caravan moved at dawn, leaving Merv behind. I looked back at the city's towering walls, the bustling bazaars, and the lantern-lit courtyards, realizing that Persia was both a reward for endurance and a reminder that the Silk Road's lessons never ended. With each mile, the road shaped travelers as much as it shaped the land itself, weaving courage, patience, and wisdom into every step of the journey. Leaving the thriving city of Merv behind, the caravan entered the Registan Desert, an expanse of rolling sand and sparse rocky outcrops stretching toward the distant horizon. The heat was relentless, pressing down on travelers and camels alike, and the wind carried fine grains of sand that stung the skin and obscured the view. Bao Li, experienced and cautious, adjusted the caravan's pace, guiding us along paths marked by ancient travelers and subtle signs in the sand. The desert tested both body and mind. Mirages appeared constantly, glimmering rivers, lush oases, and distant cities that vanished when approached. Some travelers, weary and desperate, would sprint toward the illusions, only to return defeated and exhausted. Bao Li reminded us repeatedly, "The desert plays with hope. Do not chase what is not real, or it will take more than your strength. It will take your resolve." I learned to read the heat shimmer, the movement of sand, and the subtle changes in light, training my eyes and instincts to distinguish reality from illusion. Despite its harshness, the Registan held an eerie, fragile beauty. Rolling dunes caught the sunlight, shifting like molten gold, while rocky outcrops formed strange, natural sculptures. Desert foxes and lizards moved with quiet grace, their lives adapted perfectly to the unforgiving environment. At night, the stars spilled across the sky in an unbroken canopy, reflected faintly in the sand as if the heavens themselves had descended. The caravan often paused to rest, mesmerized by the vastness and the profound silence that enveloped everything but the soft sighing of the wind. About halfway through the desert, we encountered a nomadic Turkmen tribe, traveling lightly with camels carrying textiles, hides, and dried meat. Bao Li approached respectfully, exchanging greetings and news of routes, water sources, and recent dangers. The nomads shared cautionary tales of sandstorms that could appear without warning, of entire caravans swallowed and lost, and of desert spirits said to guide the worthy or punish the careless. Their words carried authority, blending generations of experience into guidance for travelers like us. One afternoon, a sudden sandstorm arose, turning the desert into a blinding sea of dust and heat haze. Visibility dropped to mere meters. The caravan moved in slow, deliberate steps, camels sliding over shifting sand, every action measured and careful. Bao Li's voice carried over the roar of the storm, guiding us and reminding all to stay alert. Even Kadir, usually restless and curious, stayed close, aware of the desert's merciless power. The storm lasted hours, a stark reminder that the Silk Road was as much about surviving the elements as it was about trading goods. At night, when the wind finally settled, the desert took on a different character. We camped near a small, hidden oasis, palms swaying, water glimmering under the moonlight. Around the fire, merchants exchanged stories of distant cities, tales of caravan routes to the Black Sea, Persia's western regions, and ports along the Mediterranean. One merchant spoke of a caravan that had vanished for weeks, only to return with astonishing tales of secret wells, hidden valleys, and guides who appeared from nowhere. These stories, both frightening and mesmerizing, reminded us that the road was alive with uncertainty and wonder. As the caravan continued across the Registan, subtle signs of civilization began to appear. Faint trails, scattered shepherd huts, and distant smoke rising from small settlements. Bao Li emphasized vigilance and respect for both the desert and the travelers who preceded us. Each step across these sands left a mark, a testament to endurance, patience, and the intimate knowledge gained only through experience. By the seventh day, the dunes gradually gave way to low hills and plains. The horizon promised rivers, fertile valleys, and the bustling cities of Persia's western reaches. The Registan had tested our endurance, sharpened our senses, and reminded us that every mile of the Silk Road demanded respect, caution, and courage. The journey west continued, carrying merchants, goods, and stories into lands both familiar and unknown. As the Silk Road wove its intricate, living tapestry across deserts, rivers, and mountains.